How have you evolved since paying more attention to your mental health? What kind of mechanisms have you put in place, and how have they been reflected in your work?
So I fully agree with whoever that person that was that you spoke to. I've shared this a few times where it feels like in a day you'll have 3 times you'll have amazing things happen and 4 terrible things will happen. Well, it will feel like 4 terrible things, right? And it is just, you ask someone how they're feeling at like 10 a.m. It's very different to how they feel at 1 p.m. as a founder. Like, it is really, really hard. And so I think that's why I was saying earlier, I can't imagine having done this 5 years ago.
I'm joined by Sam Senior, CEO and co-founder of Testbox, a startup that aims to revolutionize the software buying experience with their product testing platform. They've created a marketplace of sorts that lets buyers test and compare different products, and have also created a solution that lets partners create their own POC environments for prospects. Testbox has raised over $12 million and hosts testing environments for companies like HubSpot, MailChimp, and Zendesk. Sam, thanks for your time today. I've got 5 questions for you. I think you know how it goes. Let's roll.
Yep, let's do it. Thanks very much for having me.
Sam, you knew you wanted to build a tech company at the age of 8. While most kids had their eyes glued to Disney Channel and were doing whatever 8-year-olds do, you found yourself captivated by Microsoft and Apple events. You were excited by the societal impact that was possible through innovative software and tech. The power of code, the power of building became apparent to you very early on. Despite this entrepreneurial instinct and innate urge to build tech, the start of your journey as a co-founder was slightly delayed. It was after 6 years of working traditional jobs that you launched Testbox. Why didn't you do it sooner? Were you waiting for the right idea or the right circumstances?
It's a very real question that I could answer with like a bunch of data that talks about the fact that actually most successful founders are in their 30s or 40s or whatever it is. But actually, like, there's a more circumstantial situation where I grew up in a really small town, kind of in the middle of nowhere in Australia. And at that time growing up, I didn't really understand what my opportunities were. I didn't understand how I could potentially get into a position to create companies. I think there was just this small town mindedness of it all. And so given that I knew where I wanted to be, I had to figure out how to actually chart the path along there. And so I actually, after leaving high school, I went and lived a year overseas in Europe, and that allowed me to sort of explore the world a little bit more and open my eyes and be like, oh, there's an opportunity to like do something more interesting here. This is before I started university. Changed my degree going through that time. I actually was thinking of doing software engineering plus marketing because I was like, how can I create this sort of environment? And then during university, I really quickly realized that I wasn't at Stanford. I wasn't at Harvard. Like, I went to this university called Queensland University of Technology. It's a fantastic university, but didn't have the brand and all of these things associated with it. And so I always felt like coming from this small town, going to this university, that it was always just going to be very difficult to find myself in the same conversations as everyone else who was typically founding companies. If you look at all the data, it tends to, unfortunately, be people who have come from fairly advantaged backgrounds. And so I was like, all right, how do I set myself up in a position where I can look like and have similar experiences those people who come from advantaged backgrounds? And so I worked at a consulting firm called Bain & Company, hires a lot of people from those sort of backgrounds, but it actually took me 3 attempts to get in. They didn't like me when I tried to go for the internship. They didn't like me the first time I tried for the graduate job. I got knocked back on all of my initial graduate applications for like McKinsey and BCG, et cetera. And it was on my 3rd go when I ended up actually applying to the London office, having taken like another 9 months in my life off and like all this sort of thing. And so I suddenly found myself in the same sort of stratosphere as all these people who tend to found companies. And that was always something that was really important to me. Maybe it was a chip on my shoulder, I don't know, but it was this sort of concept of like the small town kid with small town experiences. Okay, how do I move myself from that into other groups? And that was the path. Is like I found my way into Bain, and then I was like, all right, I now need to excel here, and I want to do a fantastic job, build relationships with people who have these sorts of experiences, and go from there. So for me, the first part was actually largely circumstantial, and like I have this goal, how do I back solve to get there? And then along the way, actually at Bain, it was actually realizing, look, I learned a lot. I was a 25-year-old who was suddenly managing people with MBAs from Harvard and Stanford, and my clients were EVPs of multi-billion-dollar companies, and I was actually learning a ton from everything that was going on. And so I think for me, it was actually a moment when I started to realize my growth and learning was starting to slow a little bit, that I started really actively looking for an opportunity to build something, and that I kind of looked at the experience I was having at Bain at the time and saw a few years around the same sort of topic. And that's what led me to say, all right, I have the people in my network. I know how to manage people. I know how to build projects. I know how to do stuff. I have an idea. So, okay, let's go do it now. So yeah, it's that circumstantial. Then it became like, I just felt like I was still learning a lot that was valuable to enable me to be successful.
Yeah, there's a time for everything. And I think you can't rush the process. As ambitious as somebody can be, they have to realize that, if you try and do something that you aren't qualified to do, you might just be setting yourself up for failure.
There's absolutely zero chance I could have done this 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Because I look at it and I think and I think this comes down to, you actually have some questions, I think, for later on in the conversation, but around like just the emotional journey that you go on as a founder. I don't think I ever really understood it. Now I obviously do. I think 5-6 years ago, like I just would not have been prepared to be even slightly sane whilst I was going through this experience.
That's a great insight. There's a lot of emotional maturing that needs to happen before you do become a founder. You initially kept Testbox's focus on customer support. You found it necessary to lock down a single niche, build out the platform, and find a repeatable model before thinking about other verticals. Only recently have you added CRM and email automation software. Your approach of using a niche market as an anchor is a strategy I've noticed to be widely advocated by other founders. What advantages have you experienced by doing so? How does one know when you're ready to expand beyond a niche?
The biggest thing is focus. And for us, that comes in the technology platform, marketing, and partnerships, right? The technology that we have built is frankly very difficult. And if we suddenly had said, we need to make this possible for every single type of software out on the planet, it would have been very difficult for us to do that from day one with any speed and any ability to go to market. The most important thing is to learn from the market as quickly as possible. So I thought, you know what, let's focus our technology really carefully on this one particular space. So that was a key one. The next piece was the marketing. Frankly, if I was out there trying to talk to every single person on the planet for all the different software buys, so we'd be talking to sales leaders, marketing leaders, support leaders, success leaders, RevOps people, like finance, HR, just the list is ridiculously endless. And you are competing for mental space in those individuals' heads, right? And they're getting marketed to from all the other HR companies or all the other finance companies, sales companies, like revenue software tools, whatever it is, right? And so you have to really choose. I think we had to choose a very specific niche so that we could actually have some form of share of voice, differentiate ourselves, and actually have the community start to advocate for us. So there's a couple of big Slack communities in the customer support space that have like 10,000 plus people in them. And now, like fairly frequently, Testbox comes up as a thing that they talk about. And it happened organically because we were talking in that space. We were talking to their colleagues. And so people just started to mention us more and more and more. So that was really, really important just to be able to build that share of voice. And then the next piece was just on partnerships, right? Like I could go out and try to make 100 different partnerships happen, but I wouldn't have come with any knowledge or any sort of experience to say, hey, I've already worked with these 6 or so major players. Here's the outcomes that we've driven with them. Now you should really be excited about working with us. If I was spreading myself thin across all of those different industries, I would have had no data points. It would actually been meaningfully much harder. So it was about building that early momentum on each of those factors. Was like, all right, we need to focus in this very specific area. No one's done what we've done before. And to date, no one is. And so we needed to be incredibly focused to prove that it was even possible and it had positive outcomes. You asked a second question there, which was, when do you know you're ready to expand beyond a niche? So I want to address that. For us, it was actually some signals, right? It was signals of that share of voice, people starting to talk about us themselves. We started to have partners who were people who weren't partners yet start to approach us and say, hey, we want to be part of your marketplace, and all of these sorts of things that demonstrated there was momentum in this space already. Additionally, it was part of our broader vision is like, we need to build this marketplace, and to build a marketplace, you can't just have one software category, you need to have many. And so now that we were confident that our technology could work, we started to build some momentum in one space. So we had a little bit of a playbook. Could we go and replicate that across multiple other areas, knowing that eventually we want to have 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 software categories on the platform? Like this year, our goal is to be at over 100 partners on our platform by the end of the year, right? And so we needed to prove that we could even do that for another category before we could expand to going into like 5 to 10 new categories. So it was also a part of like the stepping stones to growing towards the marketplace for us.
When you become a founder and CEO, particularly in the early stages of a startup, you end up taking on every function of the business. Whether you like it or not, you have to be just as involved in marketing, sales, and culture as you are in overall strategy. From sitting in on sales calls to trying to salvage a lost customer, you really have to roll up your sleeves. Having reached such a position, what areas of responsibility do you think you might have initially underestimated? Where do you think your focus has been best utilized?
Massively underestimated marketing. And I still don't really understand it. So I talked about the fact that I was supposed to do a computer science and marketing degree. Within 2 weeks, I swapped to computer science and economics as my double degree. So like, I kind of regret that a little bit because I'm still not doing a good job here. We have really struggled on the demand generation category building piece. I think I didn't understand the patience that you needed when you build a category. And so now we're focusing on this as a much slower burn to what I initially expected. And we've been really focused on bringing in people who have proven capability and experience in those sorts of areas. Initially, we didn't when we started building our marketing team, and that actually caused more issues for us than not because we were sort of scattered all over the place, and now we're able to become much, much more focused. And so I frankly didn't understand how to run a marketing team. I still don't really, and that's okay. I've now hired in people who know that stuff and are incredibly good at it. So I totally miscategorized like the effort that it took to do this. And then where do I think my focus has been best utilized? I think primarily two areas, product and then partnerships, particularly in the early days. In my head, I probably got 10 to 15 years of product vision for what this company can be and how we want to enable people to buy and manage software much more successfully than they have ever have before. And so it's almost impossible for that not to be a focus area for me because I have so much insight into it. I also built the company based off hundreds of customer interviews. So I co-designed everything. So it's really obviously a focus area for me. And then the second one is on partnerships. So at Bain, I spent a lot of time talking to partnerships leaders, channel leaders, sales leaders. And so I just deeply understood what the things that motivated them are. And so I've been able to deploy that really effectively here. And so those two areas by far have been the ones that I've been most impactful on across the business.
I once asked an accomplished founder what he found most difficult about being a CEO and building a startup from the ground up. His response was getting through the extreme highs and lows. I think most founders would agree that the mental battle is the toughest of battles. You've been pretty vocal about the importance of mental health and have strongly recommended therapy. How have you evolved since paying more attention to your mental health? What kind of mechanisms have you put in place and how have they been reflected in your work?
So I fully agree with whoever that person that was that you spoke to. I've shared this a few times where it feels like in a day, you'll have 3 times you'll have amazing things happen and 4 terrible things will happen. Well, it will feel like 4 terrible things, right? And it is just, you ask someone how they're feeling at like 10 a.m. It's very different to how they feel at 1 p.m. as a founder. Like it is really, really hard. And so I think that's why I was saying earlier, I can't imagine having done this 5 years ago because it was only about 3.5 years ago that I started my own therapy journey. I really started to understand where my deficiencies were, where the things that triggered me, what the things that triggered me are, and why I found it hard to sort of recenter myself. And now I have much better coping strategies for that. I think that's the biggest thing, right? If you're constantly going up and down all day, you need to know how to refocus and recenter. So I now do weekly therapy, have for a long time. I actually now I forced myself to get a personal trainer because I was really struggling with my fitness for a while there. And that's something that really matters to me mentally and physically. Like you just focus and you feel so much better if you feel better in your body. So I'm still working on that. But then there's other elements of like, okay, read things that talk about topics like the drama triangle and how you process things like stress and burnout, how you process like high emotional change in your body. So these have been things that I've spent a lot of time reading and had coaches actually help me with, which has been really effective. The next thing actually is talking about this openly with the team. So we have done sessions on Brené Brown. We have done sessions on vulnerability, sessions on accountability and ego and things like this. So it sort of started with me having this experience and realizing the value of it, and then really sharing it with the rest of the team, because that enables two things, right? One is the team themselves start to recognize their own behavior and self-monitor in much more effective ways, and you don't have these big dramatic things happening all the time. But the second is they actually start to understand you in a leadership role in a much different way, and they talk to you in a different way, and they empathize with you in a different way, and they don't expect you to be the answer to absolutely everything anymore. And so this journey that started 3.5 years ago for me has now led into just different operating principles and ways that we work in a much more effective, calm, easier, less stressful environment. Even if we're trying to move incredibly fast, people understand how to refocus or recenter themselves, because we focused on that in the workplace, because it's something I found particularly valuable as well.
You're originally from Australia. You made your way to London while advising software go-to-market and product strategy for Bain & Company. That role eventually brought you to San Francisco, and now it seems like you've settled in Boulder, Colorado. Having experienced these diverse business environments, what made you stay and build your startup in the US? In a world of distributed teams, you could have gone anywhere. Why Boulder, Colorado? Is there something about Americans that's won you over?
I think it's not massively surprising that we've done this, given the success of Silicon Valley-based startups and then broader US-based startups. I think there is this access to opportunity that is much harder in other markets. Like, I know there is now a growing successful startup community in Australia, but access to capital is significantly harder than the US. Same in Europe and all of these sorts of things. So that's a big one. Second is, frankly, like the risk appetite of the broader population in the US is much higher, because there have been so many successful startups previously that the exceptional engineers, product managers, sales leaders, marketers, whatever it is, have been thinking about this and had it on their radar for many years. And frequently people have said, I would like to try my hand at that at some point. So you just have this greater access to talent as a result of that. And then the third thing is, like, frankly, you look at, when you look at like the revenue breakdown of most companies in the SaaS space, it's like 50% of their revenue is North America, 25, 30% EMEA, and then rest of world, right? EMEA being Europe, Middle East. And that is because there's such a high concentration of spend and the headquarters of other companies that you're going to be selling to based in the US. So it actually makes your go-to-market significantly easier to be a US-based company. This has meant that I've been able to go see customers in person, be able to go to events with customers, that because most of the events are based here. I think it can be really special to be that company that also goes to the European events or also goes to the events in Australia or whatever it is. But there's this strength of, like, just frankly, at the end of the day, it is access to capital, access to incredible talent that are excited about doing these sorts of things already. And then your go-to-market is frankly just easier if you're present in the US.
Sam, appreciate your time. This has been wonderful. One of my best interviews, I think, on a personal level, but also in an informative way. Any final thoughts?
Oh, I appreciate you taking the time. Super well researched. And thank you for such great questions. If there is anyone who wants to be part of the customer-led buying revolution, contact me or go to testbox.com.